In this video, I want to share with you 7 important tips on how you can deal with grief and loss in your life as a man. And we're starting right now. Hi, my name is Walter Strong, the host of Real Man Rising YouTube channel, where we share helpful tips to inspire men like yourself to lead by love and integrity in your home. And as I said this morning, we're going to get into 7 important tips on how you can deal with grief and loss in your life as a man. How to deal with grief and loss in your life if you're a husband. How to deal with grief in life if you are a father. How to deal with grief and loss if you are a son. And so if you're watching me this morning, let me know in the chat where you're watching me from. Give me a hashtag team alive. And if you're watching the replay of this episode, give me a hashtag team replay in the comment section. And as we get into this episode, I realize this is going to be a different topic to discuss, but I think it's an important topic for us as men to discuss because as men, we're comfortable in talking about things that bring us joy and entertainment, such as sports, such as movies. But the topic of grief and loss, how to deal with it, the topic of dealing with the death of a loved one is a topic we as men, we push away from. It's a topic that we just want to just completely avoid sometimes in our lives. And so I was listening to a content creator last week share a video that he was doing for his morning vlog, and he was trying to discuss some things that he was dealing with in the preparation of the possibility of a loved one passing along. But he found it very difficult, and I can understand it because when we have to prepare for a loved one to pass away, it can be very difficult to deal with in the preparation of it. But yet still, he just, he kept apologizing, and and I had been pondering this topic for quite a while, and I was just trying to find the right time and moment to discuss. But then somewhere in the video he said, as men, let's face it, we're just not comfortable in dealing in discussing grief and loss and dealing with the possibility of a loved one dying. And that's when it came to me. I said, yep, we have to discuss this. We have to discuss this. So if you're joining me this morning, you're joining me for a purpose and a reason. And know that this is a discussion that you're going to get great value out of. And so I want to say good morning to my good man, Brother Rollins, for Christ, who's joining me this morning here in the live chat, all the way from North Carolina, Kakalaki. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so let's pull up the slide here. Give me a second. There we go. Got the slide up. And as I was putting this together, I always try to get a visual aid of a picture that's going to kind of speak to you and me in our discussion. And as I typed in the search bar of grief and loss of Canva, the graphic designing tool that I use, I came across this picture here, and I said, wow, this is not what I'm looking for. But as I looked a little closer, and as I looked at the description, what the description basically said, that this is a man here who is standing on the road of a very foggy and unclear road that he knows he has to travel down. But it's very foggy. It's very unclear to be able to see ahead. And what the author of this picture was saying, that's how grief and loss can be to me and you as men. That's how dealing with the death of a loved one can be for you and me as men. It can be a road now that we now have to now travel down in life without that loved one that has been in our lives for so many years, some since the time we were born, some since the time we grew up as siblings in the household. We now have to now travel down this road without them. And when I talk about grief and loss, yes, we're going to kind of focus quite a bit on the death of a loved one. But I think it's important to understand that we can experience grief and loss in many other ways. You and I can experience grief and loss through the loss of a job or a career, that one day we come to work and we get the news because the company now financially is in a place where it can no longer sustain itself, now has to go into bankruptcy. And now during the holidays, layoff notices are going out, that now the business is going under, and this will basically be me and your last week or month with the company. That's a form of grief or loss, to end up losing your career or your job, which you've been there now for maybe 5 to 10 to 15 years. Just this morning on the news, I was listening about how Party City had been going through financial difficulty since the pandemic, and not being able to recover and to move forward the way that it thought the company could, on top of having a retail online giant like Amazon. It really hurt them. And now this week they announced to their corporate employees that at the end of this month they will be closing their doors and going out of businesses. And so people are going to be losing their jobs with Party City, regardless if it's a Fortune 500 company, or a company like Party City, or a Kmart, or a Sears, companies that were once around for many years since our childhood. People have experienced the grief and loss of employment. We can also experience the grief and loss of losing a home to foreclosure because of financial challenges in our lives. We can experience grief and loss through having to start over, um, and to now relocate and to move to another city and state, because we no longer can live where we were comfortably for the last 5 to 10 years. And so these are just some of the ways that we deal with grief and loss. And personally, we can also deal with the grief and loss of a dream that we thought was going to be fulfilled, a dream that we thought that we were going to see come to pass, and only to die. So these are just some of the ways as men we can deal with grief and loss. But we also can deal with the grief and loss of a loved one. As I said, that we care about so much, that grief and loss and loved one of a mother and father, that grief and loss of a sister or a brother, that grief and loss of an auntie or grandparent, grandfather or grandmother. These are just some of the ways that we deal with it. And it's interesting because we are all unique and different. We all will deal with grief and loss not the same way. We will deal with grief and loss in different ways. But the question is, how do we deal with it in a way that's constructive and positive, that will help me and you to move forward down this foggy and unclear road that this gentleman is in the image of this picture? Well, point number one, here's the first way. If you're listening to me this morning on the episode of Man Talk Live, we have to allow ourselves to grieve. We have to allow ourselves to grieve the passing of a loved one. The initial shock of the phone call that we get that a loved one has passed away, it's very traumatizing and traumatic. It's not something that me and you can prepare for. But when we get it's It's the start of traveling down this road. I remember several years ago, back maybe between 93 and 95 when my mom passed away. Prior to her passing away, I felt the Lord really impressing on me as a young new Christian to really be thankful every time that I got up in the morning for my family members, that they were alive. And I'm living in Long Island, New York. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. And so I got up every morning before I started my day, and I thank God for waking me up this morning, giving me the activity of my limbs, giving me the breath in my body to breathe, giving me a sound mind, to be clothed in the right mind, and to start the day um, with new opportunities. But I also took the time to thank the Lord that I did not get a phone call in the middle of the night saying that a loved one or a family member had passed away. And I thanked him for my mother. I thanked him for my father. I thanked him for my sister, my grandparents, and other family members and friends. And I did this for quite a while. I did this for quite a while, for several weeks and several months. And then on September 15th, I believe it was, um, I got the phone call around about 11 o'clock at night from my sister that my mom's had passed away. And we talked for a while, and we talked about, okay, we got to get together and we're going to have to prepare mom's, um, funeral. We got to go through the whole process of, finding out if she had life insurance, because that was something foreign to me and my sister. We didn't really know too much about life insurance. And if she didn't, how were we going to prepare and to bury her? But after getting off the phone with her, I ended up having to call a friend and share with him the passing of my mom's. And I told him I just couldn't go to sleep, and I was just numb. And he kind of just shared and talked with me and just said, "Hey, I'm here. If you just want to stay on the phone and just have someone on the other end just for a while until you're ready to go to sleep, I'm here." He says, "But you're gonna get through this." And so I share this because when you first get that first phone call, or you get that news that that loved one has passed away, it can be very traumatizing. It can cause you to be numb. It can put you in a fog of how can you move forward? How is this possible? My mom, she was 45 years old when she passed away. And so she was still young. Um, though I was grateful, she had recently rededicated her life to the Lord, and she had found her a church home. But as a new babe in Christ, she was still trying to find her way, and then to have to pass away because of her health issues, it was very devastating to me. So as we moved forward, went home to Detroit, and we had the funeral service. The pastor of the church that she was attending did the service for us, and we did the cemetery, spent time with family, and we moved on. And instead of allowing myself the time to properly mourn and grieve my mother's death, I threw myself into work. I threw myself into things. I threw myself into just getting back to life as normal, but never really taking the time to allow myself to grieve. Have you did that as a man? When you've gotten that phone call that a loved one or family member has passed away, did you take the time to allow yourself to mourn and grieve your loved one? Or did you give yourself the excuse that I'm just too busy right now? I have to move on. I can't deal with this right now. That mom's has passed away, that dad has passed away, that my cousin, my favorite cousin, is now gone. Did you throw yourself, or did you throw yourself into some self-destructive behavior like alcohol or drugs to numb the pain? Did you throw yourself into self-destructive behavior, into promiscuity or sex? Did you throw yourself into self-destructive behavior where you end up now finding yourself just depressed, but never allowing yourself the time to properly grieve and mourn? And giving yourself the proper time to mourn a loved one is something that God has created for me and you as men to do. If you look through the Bible, if you go to Joshua chapter 1, the Bible says that as the children of Israel were getting ready to go into the promised land and to move forward without Moses, God told Joshua that Moses, my servant, is dead. And it was now time for them to move forward and to cross into the promised land, which says to me and you, God knew that the children of Israel and Joshua needed a period of time to mourn their great leader, Moses. I'll give you another example. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, though he is not dead, he's alive. God says to the prophet Saul, how long will you mourn for Saul? Saul was not dead, but Saul, who was anointed Israel's first king, had failed terribly in being the king that God had wanted him to be, and who did not have a heart after God and was leaving the people in a different direction than the will of God for their lives. God said, how long will you mourn for Saul? And he said it was time for him to move forward and to now anoint the next king, which would be David. So God knows, as men and women who may be listening this morning here on Man Talk Live, because maybe you're dealing with the struggle of dealing with grief and loss yourself because of a father, a husband, a son. God knows we need the proper time to allow ourselves to mourn and to grieve. My next point is, if you're listening to me this morning here on Man Talk Live or on the replay, is we need to at times seek support in helping me and you to grieve and to mourn the loss, as I said, of a loved one, mourn the loss of a career or job. Maybe instead of you being laid off, maybe you were fired from your job. And as a result, now you're struggling with trying to get back into the workforce. You're struggling to get back and to find a career that you can now move forward in, because you had maybe been doing this one particular form of work for, as I said, for 10 to 20 years. And because now you are now at a certain age gap of 45 to 55, and a lot of individuals are much younger than you, and you're finding it difficult to get back into the workforce, and you're struggling with the loss of that job, the loss, like I said, of that home. I think about the mortgage crisis back in 2008 and 2009, and how so many people, because of the greed of people in corporate America, and throwing people and taking advantage of people and putting into subprime mortgages and getting them to take out second mortgages like home equities, and not clearly explaining to them the difference between a fixed rate and a variable rate. And when the mortgage crisis hit, thousands upon thousands of people lost their homes to foreclosure. And now they're trying to move forward now, even in today's time. Sometimes the loss can not just come from the greed of people in corporate America. Sometimes it can come through natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy. and you're still trying to move forward. And if you're that person, sometimes it's important for me and you to seek the right support to help me and you to mourn and to grieve our losses. Seeking support is not a form of weakness on our part. Seeking support from others who can help guide me and you down this foggy road of life is good wisdom. But unfortunately, sometimes we as men, we grow up in a home where we're told what goes in this house stays in this house. What is said in this house stays in this house. What is done in this house stays in the house. From what the last generation taught us, and then we bring on into our generation with our children, is this silent frustration and battle that we're going through that we don't want people to know that we're going through. We got over 3,000 people following us on Facebook or X, but we feel isolated and alone, and we don't know how to reach out for support from others because we're struggling with grief and loss. Is that you this morning? As a man, are you struggling to find support? And I get it. Sometimes we want to use wisdom in who we share and we talk with, because we can't share and seek support from everyone. We have to be able to seek support from the right people who have the experience and the maturity to know that what we share with them will be shared with them in confidence. And we don't have to worry about our business being told out in the public streets or on the news or social media. So I get it. I get it. But when you find the right support, and that support can come through maybe through counseling, sitting down with a pastor or a leader in your church. It can come through the support of a support group, through a ministry in your church or outside of your church, or it can come through one-on-one counseling, through therapy. But if you and I are going to learn how to properly deal with grief and loss in our lives, we have to allow ourselves the time to grieve, and we have to allow ourselves to seek the right support. My next point is we have to engage in self-care. We have to engage in self-care and taking care of ourselves. What do I mean by that? Engaging in self-care is not just physically taking care of yourself and pampering yourself and doing nice things for yourself, but engaging in self-care and taking care of yourself mentally, knowing what's going on with you emotionally, and knowing that if you're not in a good place mentally or emotionally, begin to take the steps, though the road may be foggy and unclear. Begin to take the steps to get the right type of self-care for yourself emotionally and mentally. Because when you take the steps to engage in self-care, it's going to help you, though the road that you have to journey down now, because if you are a mother whose son now who is tragically passed away and has not even lived life long enough past 21, you you go through these battles as a parent and say, how is this happening to me? Why did this happen the way that it happened? Did this happen because maybe I was not good enough as a parent? These things are real. Women go through it. Even we as men go through it. We have to seek and engage in self-care. You know, on our jobs, most of our jobs, those of us who work, our jobs will give us that time necessary after the funeral, instead of just coming back to work. And if they see the need is there, companies will provide us the time that we need to get ourselves in a place mentally and emotionally to move forward in life. The problem, however, for us as men, though, we don't take advantage of it. Women will take advantage of it, but we as men won't take advantage of it. And again, we throw ourselves into our careers. We throw ourselves into our jobs. We throw ourselves into the next job task that has to be completed by a certain deadline. And we don't get the self-care that we need. Which ties into my next point. When we fail to get the right type of self-care that we need to learn how to properly deal with grief and a loss, we fail to struggle how to properly express our emotions of what we're going through. And let me tell you something. If as you go through this life and you experience the death and the passing of one loved one, guess what? Next thing you know, a year from after that, 2 years after that, 3 years after that, you're back dealing with it again because of another loved one. I think about a testimony that a friend of mine told me during COVID. He shared that he had dealt with almost 30 people's death that were close to him. These people, rather being family or friends. And as a result of him not allowing himself the time to grieve, not being able to seek support, because at the time the world was shut down and we were isolated in our homes, and not knowing how to get proper self-care for himself, he fell into the emotion of depression. And as a result of falling into deep depression, it was affecting him not only emotionally, but it was affecting him even in his health. And so what that says to me and you, if we keep pushing this stuff down, pushing this grief down inside us, pushing down these feelings of loss down on the inside of us, ultimately it's going to affect us with negative emotions. I remember shortly after my mom's had passed away and I was trying to, move forward in my life, and I made the commitment to go back to school and to get my college degree. And I was taking an economics course, which was a required course. And the first two exams this professor gave, I was struggling. My first exam, I got like a 55. My second one, I got like almost like a 59. These types of grades that I was getting were very foreign and uncommon for me. The professor was presenting the material in such a fast pace that was very difficult for me as an adult to keep up with. And I was finding out that there were other students, other adults who worked a full-time job like me, were dealing with the same type of issues. And I knew that if I didn't pass this next exam, my chances of being able to get a respectable grade that I was looking to get, prior to my other classes, I'm finishing the classes with B pluses and A's. I'm scoring in the high 90s and 95s. So getting grades of between 50 and 55 was just completely uncommon for me. And I remember sitting down trying to study the material, and I got frustrated. I got frustrated, and I felt myself to the point where I slammed my fist on the table, and I just said, "Ma, I can't do it, Ma. I can't do it." Now, this had happened when I went back to school. When I went back to school, she passed away around about 93, 94. This happened probably, I want to say, about 96 or 97. And I just fell on the floor and I broke down in tears emotionally. And I cried and I cried and I cried and I cried. By the time I was done, I felt like this weight and this burden had come off my shoulders. And the clarity that I needed to be able to move forward in that class began to slowly come. And when the class semester was over, I ended up finishing with a B plus in the class. My point is, I had been throwing myself into work, into school, into other things, and never allowing myself to properly grieve and mourn. And it came out in such a way in my emotions that I literally felt like I was having a nervous breakdown. Has that ever happened to you as a man? I know I know you're supposed to be a tough man. I know you're supposed to be a rough man. I know you're supposed to be a man who has it all together, everything is in control, but yet you feel like emotionally on the inside of you, everything is falling apart all around you. That's because you're not allowing yourself the time to properly mourn and to grieve. My next point is, as you are traveling down this road of learning how to deal with grief and loss in your life, there may become an opportunity for you to be able to honor your loved one. Honor your loved one through a special cause. Maybe your loved one passed away through Alzheimer's, and you were an individual who had to be a caregiver to them. And now you feel, what's next for me? What's next for me? Now that said loved one has now transitioned to go home to be with the Lord. What's next for you? Well, you, after getting yourself together, after you spending time and engaging in self-care, you may have the opportunity to help encourage other caregivers go through the process of a family member that you've taken care of and supported for many years because of them maybe having dementia or Alzheimer's. And now you can kind of pass on your wisdom and your experience to other caregivers as a cause or finding meaning in your life to move forward. We hear about these things being done where individuals are able to find meaning in a cause through helping with cancer research and support, through helping other parents whose loved ones were tragically killed in school shootings, they find meaning in helping others. They've come to understand that it was important for them. If you've ever been on an airplane and you've experienced turbulence, when the oxygen masks go down, they say, before you try to put an oxygen mask on someone else, you need to put an oxygen mask on yourself first before seeking to help others. So if you've taken that time and you've put the oxygen mask on yourself to be able to get the proper self-care and emotional help and support that you need, finding meaning may now mean helping others navigate down the journey of grief and loss as you have. And then lastly, I know I put this to the second to last point, but I had to switch the order. I need to encourage you today, especially those of you who are watching the replay. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself, because you're going to be dealing with grief and loss over a period of time. There is something called anniversary grief. When you come across that time of when said loved one has passed away, I remember September 15th. I just don't remember the year that mom's passed away, but I remember the date, September 15th, when I got that phone call from my sister. I remember where I was. It was around 11 o'clock. I remember the phone call that I got from my niece early in the morning on September 25th when my father passed away. I remember the phone call that I got on February 15th when my sister passed away. And that one, I've dealt with the passing of loved ones all throughout my life, especially where I have to fly home from New York to Detroit. But what was different about that one was when my mom passed away, my sister was there to greet me, and we're able to work together and to get the family through it together. When my grandmother passed away on my mother's side, who was there? It was my sister there to greet me. When my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side, and my father having to experience the death of his parents on two separate occasions, who was there to greet me? It was my sister, traveling all the way from New York to Detroit. But this was different. This was different for me. When I got the phone call that my sister had passed away from my niece, though I knew my nieces and my nephews would be there and other family members would be there to support me when I got home with me and my family to do my sister's homegoing service. This was different. My little sister, was no longer there. So sometimes there's anniversary grief of you remembering the dates and the times and the moments of where you were at. There's anniversary grief or holiday grief during holiday times where the loved one is no longer there during the holidays of Thanksgiving or Christmas. You hear a particular song that your loved one loves so much, like "It Is Well." It is well with my soul. And you hear that song, and it takes you back to those moments and times of your loved one. But whether if it's anniversary grief or holiday grief, I need you to be patient with yourself. You need to be patient with yourself to going down this road, understanding and knowing that you haven't lost your loved one. You haven't lost your loved one. Your loved one, if they gave their life to Christ, they are now in heaven with the Father. And one day when Jesus comes back, if you are a Christian and you understand the word of God biblically, that he's going to come back, and the dead in Christ will rise first. And then those of us will be caught up to meet him in the air. We have a lively and eternal hope that we will see our loved ones again. So we haven't lost them. We know where they are. Are we going to miss them? Yes. Are we going to miss their smile? Are we going to miss their touch? Are we going to miss the conversation? Yes. You may be a person like me who has a loved one's voicemail on your phone and you haven't erased it. I still have my father's one of his last voice messages that he left me in June of 2021, and I still have it on my phone. I won't erase it. I still have his number in my phone, but I know where he is, and I understand I need to be patient with myself. Will I ever bring myself to the point or place will I will erase his voice message? I don't know. I don't know. But from time to time, I play it just to hear his voice. Just to hear his voice. I share this with you as another man to encourage you this morning that if you're dealing with some of these things, it's okay. It's okay. And you need to be patient with yourself. Hey, if you've gotten great value out of this episode of Man Talk Live on how to deal with grief and loss, do me a favor, click that like button for me. Share this on your favorite social media platform. And if you are new to Real Men Rising YouTube channel, where we share helpful tips to inspire men like yourself to lead by love and integrity, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. Click the alert notification button so you'll be alerted when we go live or when we post our next video that will add value to you as a man to help you to be a great husband, a devoted father, and a man of integrity. Just checking to see if I have any other comments, which I don't see. And so we're going to go ahead and bring this episode to a close. But before we do, those of you who are watching us live, if you have a question on how to deal with grief and loss, put it in the chat. I'll hang around for a few minutes and respond to any questions that you may have or respond to any comments that you have. Brother Rollins says, true, seeking the right support is so important. It is. It is. And as I have this comment up, I think it's important to understand that when we seek support for help as men, it does not mean, what's the word that I'm looking for? It does not mean that we are weak. It does not mean that we don't have it all together. And when I say all together, we don't have it all together, not only emotionally, but we don't have it all together mentally. Seeking support can sometimes mean getting therapy and speaking with some one-on-one in counseling. Seeking support can sometimes mean spending a few days in a psychiatric facility. Yeah, sometimes it may mean admitting yourself if you are dealing with grief and loss and depression, and it's affecting your emotional and physical health to the point where you have to be admitted in a hospital for a period of time. seeking the right support is something sometimes we as men, we may have to do. I know in the past that that was a stigma that we did not, as men, particularly as black men, we didn't want it to be associated with. But in today's times that we live in, especially now coming out of the pandemic, there's so many ways now that you can be able to seek support, the right type of support in the right type of way, in a way that can respect your privacy and respect your dignity as a man and help you to still function and move forward in life. But you got to seek the support. You got to engage in self-care. You got to be willing to learn how to express your emotions properly, what you're going through. I'll let that breathe right there. I'll let that breathe. Hey, I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this episode. I realize that this is not a very sexy and entertaining topic to discuss. But guess what? It's a needed and important topic that we as men have to talk about. And you may not need it right now, but mark my words, 30 days from now, 90 days from now, 6 months from now, you're going to need to listen to this episode of Man Talk Live. Hey, check out the next video that YouTube is going to show you, or we'll see you in the next one. God bless.